The house was silent except for the low hum of work lights and the soft crunch of dust under my shoes. I remember gripping the doorframe, my fingers numb, staring at something my husband had hidden so well it felt like the walls themselves were complicit. My heart wasn't racing, it was sinking, slow and heavy, as if it already knew this moment would rewrite everything I thought was true. If you've ever trusted someone completely and later realized how fragile that trust really was, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Stories like this don't belong to one person. The air smelled like old paper and exposed wood, and the light revealed shelves that should not have existed, files that had been waiting longer than I could comprehend. In that instant, grief took a step back and something colder took its place. I understood that love had not disappeared. It had been repurposed into secrecy. And that was the moment everything started to unravel. I was standing in my own house when I realized my husband had been lying to me for decades. Not about money or affairs, but about something far more dangerous. My name is Margaret Lawson. I'm in my early 60s, and I became a widow a little over a year ago. I thought grief was the worst thing that could happen to a woman like me. I was wrong. What I felt in that moment was colder than grief. My chest tightened. The house went quiet, and I understood that whatever I was about to uncover had been hidden on purpose. The man I loved had built a life I was never meant to see, and once I saw it, there would be no going back. Before all of this, my life was ordinary. 40 years of marriage, 2 grown sons, routines that felt safe. That normal life ended. I met my husband Thomas when we were both barely out of college. He was steady, observant, the kind of man people trusted without questioning why. For more than 40 years, that steadiness defined our life together. We raised 2 sons, attended school events, sat through church services every Sunday, and waved at neighbors who had known us for decades. Nothing about our life drew attention, and that felt like success. Thomas was a respected estate attorney in our Ohio town. People came to him with their worries and left feeling lighter. At home, he was the same man, quiet, predictable, never cruel, never dramatic. I believed consistency was the truest form of love. When he died suddenly at his desk, the shock hollowed me out. Grief did not arrive loudly. It settled into routines, empty chairs, and habits I could not break. One room in particular stayed untouched. His home office remained sealed. The door closed as if it might breathe without him inside. I told myself it was respect, not fear. A year passed, on our anniversary. I realized I could not live around a locked room forever. I wanted to turn it into something warm, something forward, a small library, sunlight, space for my grandchildren. Renovating felt like healing, not searching. That was the decision that started everything. I believed I was choosing peace, unaware that peace sometimes opens doors meant to stay closed forever, and I stepped forward trusting the past would remain quiet behind me. I was sitting alone in a church pew when my phone vibrated against my palm. The service had just begun. The room hushed, the kind of quiet that usually steadied me. I almost ignored the call. Something told me not to. As soon as I answered, my body reacted before my mind did. My chest tightened, my breath caught. And I knew the calm I had been holding on to was about to break. The man renovating my house was careful with his words, too careful. I could feel what he was not saying pressing between us. There was urgency in his pause, a weight that made the space around me feel smaller. I understood that whatever he had found was not an accident or damage or a simple mistake. It had been placed there intentionally, hidden with effort, waiting. By the time the call ended, my hands were shaking. I sat frozen, staring forward while the familiar walls of the church felt suddenly distant. One thought settled clearly in my mind. I could not face this alone. I outside called my sons and told them to meet me at the house. Walking to my car, I knew it had shifted. I arrived first, parking in the driveway I had pulled into for decades, yet it felt unfamiliar. Daniel arrived minutes later, stepping out of his car with the same controlled posture he used in courtrooms. Grief had made him sharper, more guarded. Evan followed shortly after, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the house as if he already sensed something was wrong. He carried his grief quietly, inward, like a weight he refused to set down. They had barely spoken since their father's funeral. Loss had pulled them in opposite directions, and standing between them, I felt the distance as clearly as the space in the air. The contractor waited near the front door. He did not meet my eyes. His discomfort unsettled me more than any explanation could have. Inside, the house sounded hollow. Carpet was gone, walls echoed, dust hung in the light, and the familiar warmth of home had thinned into something watchful. We moved slowly down the hallway, our footsteps uneven. No one rushed. No one asked questions. I could feel all of us bracing, instinctively delaying what waited ahead. When we stopped outside the office door, I felt it settle in my chest. Whatever was on the other side had been kept from me for years. Opening that door would not just reveal a room, it would alter how we understood our father, our family, and ourselves. I stood there knowing that once we stepped inside, nothing would return to the way it had been. The office did not look like the room I remembered. The desk was gone, the shelves stripped, the walls exposed down to pale studs. It felt less like a renovation and more like something being excavated. The air smelled of dust and old wood, sharp and unfamiliar, as if the room had been holding its breath for years. At the far wall, where Thomas's desk had always rested, there was no wall at all. In its place was an opening, clean and deliberate. Beyond it sat a narrow room, no wider than a closet, lit by temporary work lights that cast long shadows. My legs weakened before my mind caught up. I held the doorframe to steady myself. Inside, shelves lined every inch from floor to ceiling. They were filled with folders, stacked with care, each one labeled. Nothing was random, nothing was forgotten. I recognized the handwriting instantly. The same neat script he used on birthday cards and legal documents stared back at me from every tab. My heart began to race, not from surprise, but from recognition. This room had not been created in a moment of panic or impulse. It had been planned, built, hidden behind layers of intention. Years, maybe decades, had gone into making sure no one would ever know it existed. I stepped closer, drawn despite myself. The folders were not dusty. They had been handled, maintained, returned to their places. This was not storage. It was a system. Each shelf followed a pattern. Photographs first, then papers, then handwritten notes. A cold realization settled over me as I stood there. Thomas had not been collecting objects. He had been cataloging lives, people from our town, from our church, from our dinner table. Whatever love I thought I understood suddenly felt fragile, reframed by the quiet precision of that room. I stood inside the hidden space, surrounded by evidence of a life I had never seen, knowing this was only the beginning. I knew that once I touched a folder, especially one close to me, there would be no turning back for us all. Daniel began scanning folders with a focus I recognized from his work, eyes moving quickly, jaw tightening. Evan moved slower, lingering on photographs, his hands unsteady as he set each file back in place. I stayed near the doorway, watching my sons react to pieces of a man we thought we knew. One folder stood apart. It was thinner, marked only with a date from decades earlier. When it was opened, the photograph slid free, and I felt the air leave my lungs before I even looked closely. The woman in those images was younger, unaware, caught in ordinary moments. It took seconds to understand why they felt so wrong. The woman was me. There were pictures I did not remember being taken, receipts from trips I thought were simple errands, dates that lined up with arguments we never finished, and silences I had learned to accept. My name appeared in his handwriting, steady and precise, followed by notes I could not yet absorb. I felt something fracture quietly inside me. This was not curiosity or coincidence. It was observation, documentation. I had lived beside him, believing I was known, only to realize I had been studied, A phrase at the top of one page stopped me cold. He had written that I was protected, that risk remained ongoing. Protection, risk, words I had never associated with my marriage rearranged every memory I held. The trips he insisted on, the questions he never answered, the arguments we avoided rather than resolved. Grief shifted shape in that moment. It sharpened. I understood that the man I loved had been watching me as closely as anyone else in that room. And if there was a file about me, then whatever danger existed was not distant or theoretical. It was personal, and it was not finished yet. At the back of the hidden room, partially obscured by shelving, I noticed a metal safe set directly into the wall. It did not belong to the house. It belonged to intention. The sight of it made my stomach drop in a way the folders had not. Papers could be explained. A safe could not. We stood there longer than necessary before opening it. I was aware of my breathing, of how quiet the room had become, as if it were waiting. When the lock finally gave way, what lay inside felt heavy before I touched anything. There was a leather-bound notebook filled with dates, names, and amounts written in Thomas's careful hand. Page after page. Transactions tracked with precision. Beside it were small recording tapes, each labeled. Spanning years, I thought I understood. Beneath those rested a handgun wrapped in cloth. Seeing it erased any remaining illusion that this was about curiosity or protection alone. At the bottom sat a passport. The photograph was his face, older but unmistakable. The name was not his. Holding it, I felt the truth settle with a clarity that frightened me. My husband had not simply kept secrets. He had maintained another life entirely. The ledger confirmed what my mind resisted. These payments were not legal fees or settlements. They were exchanges for silence, compliance, disappearance. Whatever Thomas had been involved in was organized, deliberate, and dangerous. In that moment, fear became practical. This was bigger than our family, bigger than grief. The room was no longer a secret history. It was evidence. And evidence does not stay hidden once it is found. I knew then that opening the safe meant the world beyond our walls would soon notice what we had uncovered, and nothing about our lives would remain untouched again. When the knock came at the door, I expected more questions from the contractor. Instead, I saw a badge and a calm face that did not match the urgency in his eyes. The way he looked past me, toward the open hallway, told me this was already bigger than us. As he spoke, I realized he knew pieces of Thomas's life that I had only just uncovered. Accounts missing, a former partner gone. His words were careful, measured, but they carried weight. Before I could steady myself, my phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. It was brief, direct, and unmistakable in its intent. Stop looking. The fear arrived before I could process it. My heart began to race, and my attention snapped to every sound in the house. Seconds later, a crash shattered the living room window. Glass scattered across the floor as something heavy landed inside. Wrapped around it was a list of names. Mine, my son's. Instinct took over. I moved toward my children without thinking, my body already deciding what my mind could not. The man at the door did not hesitate. Radios crackled, voices filled the space. Suddenly, our home felt exposed, fragile, no longer ours. Within minutes, strangers were everywhere, securing rooms, watching the street. I understood then that silence was no longer an option. Whatever Thomas had been part of, someone knew we had found it. And they were afraid of what we might uncover next. That night, things changed forever. We were taken to a quiet government house outside town, a place designed to feel temporary, neutral walls, soft lighting, no personal history. That was where the truth finally reached me. A man I had trusted for years sat across from me, his expression heavy with restraint. As he spoke, pieces of my life loosened and shifted. I learned that the name I carried was not the one I was born with. Before I was 7, I had lived another life, one that ended in a house fire officially ruled an accident. It had not been an accident. I was the only witness. My childhood records were altered, my past rewritten to keep me safe, over time. Memory blurred into something survivable. I grew up believing I had always been who I was. Thomas had discovered the truth long before our wedding. Instead of telling me, he chose silence. Everything he built, every secret, every file, was meant to keep distance between me and the man who caused that fire. Protection was not paranoia, it was preparation. As this settled, I felt strangely calm. Memories reorganized themselves, arguments I never pushed, trips he insisted on, the watchfulness I once called care. My son sat nearby, absorbing the same realization. The danger we faced had not begun with the renovation. It had followed me quietly my entire life. Thomas's death had removed the barrier he stood behind. By opening the hidden room, I had not created the threat. I had simply alerted it that I was no longer protected. In that moment, I understood something devastating. The truth we uncovered did not wake danger. It reminded it that I was still alive. And with that understanding came fear for my children, because whatever waited next would reach for them first, always. After the revelation, the world did not explode. It went quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that hums with intention. That was when the pressure shifted away from me and settled on my sons. Daniel was the first to feel it. A complaint surfaced at his firm, detailed and anonymous, questioning decisions that had never been questioned before. Evan followed the next morning. His school requested an urgent meeting. Vague concerns raised with surgical care. Nothing concrete, nothing easily disproved, just enough to stain. I watched them read messages, shoulders tightening, eyes hardening. Guilt surfaced quickly. Daniel blamed the discovery. Evan blamed his father. Fear turned inward and then outward, sharp enough to cut. For the first time since their father's death, grief turned into anger between them. I listened without interrupting. Something steadier than fear was taking shape inside me. Thomas had not gathered secrets for power. He had gathered time we no longer had. Silence had protected me once, but it was failing my children now. I saw then what the threat really wanted, not to frighten us into hiding, but to break us quietly, piece by piece, until we stopped asking questions. That clarity changed everything. Retreat would not save us. Waiting would not protect them. If truth was being punished, then truth was the only ground left to stand on. I felt resolve replace panic. Whatever came next, I would meet it awake, present, and unwilling to be silent again, for them and myself. We returned to the house under escort, long after sunset, when everything familiar feels different. Neighbors watched from behind curtains. The rooms looked staged, almost hollow, stripped of comfort and trust. I felt oddly calm, alert in a way fear no longer controlled. When the doorbell rang, I knew before anyone moved. The voice on the porch was gentle, familiar. Someone who had brought casseroles after the funeral and spoken softly about faith and patience. As he stepped inside, something small gave him away, a detail about my past he should not have known. In that instant, recognition replaced doubt. I watched the realization cross his face as he saw it settle in mine. There was no shouting, no chaos, just the quiet collapse of a mask. Through his careful explanations, I understood the truth I had resisted. He had been there the night of the fire. He had waited years to see if I would remember. When Thomas discovered him, silence became necessary. My husband had not died naturally. He had been removed. What surprised me most was my own steadiness. Fear drained away, replaced by clarity. I did not need to confront him. I needed to wait. And I did. When authorities moved in, it happened quickly and without spectacle. As they led him away, he looked confused, almost offended. He had believed I was fragile, too quiet to matter. That misjudgment ended him. Standing there, I felt no triumph, only certainty. The danger was neutralized at last. After the arrest, the house grew quiet again, but this time the silence felt earned. Agents cataloged what mattered, and when they were finished, the rest was left to me. I sat with the folders for days, touching the weight of 40 years without letting it control me. Some truths belonged to the law. Those went where they should. Others were not justice. They were leverage, old failures and private mistakes that had harmed no one except the people who carried them. I destroyed those slowly, page by page. choosing not to inherit fear as a legacy. When the renovation was finished, the hidden room no longer existed. In its place stood a small library, warm shelves, soft light, a chair by the window, a room meant for reading, not watching. My grandchildren were the first to sit there, unaware of what had been buried behind those walls. I understood then what Thomas never fully accepted. Control delays reckoning, choice ends it. I chose to live without secrets that required silence to survive. The house felt like a home again, not because the past was erased, but because it no longer ruled us. I stood still, breathing. The future arrive. I am still the same woman who lived a quiet life for decades, but I am no longer untouched by truth. What I learned did not make me harder, it made me clearer. I understand now that strength does not announce itself. It waits, observes, and chooses carefully. For a long time, I believed survival meant staying silent and small. I was wrong. Survival is staying present without becoming cruel. It is refusing to inherit fear just because it was handed to you. It is knowing when to speak and when to let something end. If you have stayed with me through this story, thank you. Sharing it was not about exposing darkness. It was about proving that quiet people are not powerless. We are patient. And patience, when paired with truth, is formidable. If this story stirred something in you, I hope you sit with it gently. Ask yourself where you have been underestimated or where you have chosen silence to stay safe. And if you feel comfortable, tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. I read everyone. Your voice matters more than you think. Thank you for listening and being here.